back to the Exchange Place podcast, y'all. Hey, y'all. Happy New Year. It is 2022 and we are evolving. I'm so excited today to have a special guest. Now, I told y'all with this whole evolving that I've met some super amazing people that weren't necessarily in Jersey. So we will be bringing them to you a little bit different because we are what, y'all? We are evolving. So this is the evolution. I know that you guys are so used to kind of me being in the studio, but I have, when I say a heavy hitter in here today, we have Dr. V with us today, who is, give it up. Yes. Who is a author, who is a amazing coach, and she's a great speaker, which you guys will get to hear all of the gems and jewels that I know she's gonna drop on us today. But most of all, she's my den sister, y'all. I have told y'all so much about, I know you feel like you know, Pastor Darius Daniels, who is not only my pastor, but also my coach and mentor. And in the den, we always say that everything is in the den. So I was blessed enough to connect with my sister. And you're just a gem. I want to thank you first and foremost for taking time out to even come on the show. I heard your story in a live that you had done with Dr. D. And I was blown away. I was really like, wow, I really wanted you to come on the show and share your experiences, but most of all, just to look at relationships different. I think we have these relationship goals, and I thought you would be the perfect person to come on and just, again, drop some gems on us today, Dr. V. Drop some gems.
Thank you so much for having me today. And I'm not sure what type of gems I will be dropping. But yeah, the idea for me in terms of relationship goals, for me was really rooted and grounded in the way in which I was raised. And I talked about this when I was on the live with Dr. Darius, which was, I was raised with one of those ride or die type of mentality. Like when it comes to relationships, you should be whatever, you should do whatever, you can always count on me. And it wasn't until later on in life where I made so many mistakes and so many failures that the Holy Spirit really revealed to me that that was not of him, that was of culture. And for me, I was in my relationship for 15 years, 7 years I dated. And then I got married to that same person for 8 years. And I thought he was the man of my dreams. I told somebody one day, I said, "Ooh, it must have been the Lord, because I think he's an angel who sent directly for me." And a lot of that had to do with the way that I saw myself. He really represented what I thought I wanted to be. So I grew up, California girl here. I grew up in South Central LA. So, you know, when SQ talks about how to survive in South Central, that was me. I grew up in a very urban setting, of course, went to a predominantly African-American high school. And it wasn't until I went to college where it was only 2.3% of African-American students. It was like whitey, white. And it was really a culture shock for me. And so I really tried my best to fit in. And I thought all the Black people who went to the college I went to had a similar upbringing as I did, and they did not. And so they called me different kinds of names. Like they called me ghetto and that I was hood. And I was like, well, what does that really mean? Right? Because I had gold chains dripping all down my neck. I had rings on every finger. And sometimes I had two rings on one finger. And so
I feel you. I can connect.
So I was like, hey, this is what it's supposed to be like. And so I started to change myself so that I could adapt to what the culture was, so that I could less loud, because I was called that too, a social butterfly. Somebody said everybody knows when you walk in the room, because I was like, hey. And so when I graduated from college, I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was in law school, and I had an internship at Wells Fargo. And this is where I met who I thought was the man of my dreams. And he represented everything that I wasn't and that I wanted to be. So he was very poised, very incredibly articulate. He was an English major. I was like, gosh, I never met a Black man who majored in English. And he had a very commanding presence. I thought he was a lawyer. He was a paralegal who worked there, and he was also in law school. And so he wasn't the type of guy that I was used to dating. So I think back then it was like, you know, guys who wore the creased white shirts or white beaters. And so I would really gravitated toward him because, again, he represented the person I really wanted to be. And he said to me, that reflected that. So he told me he saw that I had a lot of grace and poise. And I was like, what? Okay. He said he thought that, he said I looked like a gazelle because I had so much confidence when I walked. And I was like, hey, you fake it till you make it. And so I just went through this whole season of my life where I was trying to be someone who I wasn't. And so when we ultimately got married, I think sometimes when you try to be somebody who you're not, the real you will eventually come out. But I really didn't know. You just don't know yourself. You think you do, and you don't. And so I get into this marriage, and my ride or die started to kick in. And he had a very domineering personality. And what that might look like was that he would never raise his voice. But, you know, when he said something, it was like, okay, it was the book of James. It was the book of, right? It's the book of John. It's the book of whomever, right? You start looking at this person and you elevate them and you put them on a pedestal. And so I think for me, for myself, I really started to morph in who I thought he wanted me to become. And so
can we talk about that for a minute? Because I think you said, I think most people who are listening can 100% relate to you in one or another area, just like me. I know what, again, growing up with the ride or die mentality, right? I think I want to go back to that just to start. Like, where do you think that came from? I know for me, right? I grew up in a very urban area, and loyalty, or what was thought to be loyalty to other people, was more important than loyalty to myself. So can you tell us about, like, when did you realize you had that, like, ride or die, you know what I mean, mentality, and that you were moving in that? Was that prior to meeting him, or was that after?
I was raised with the ride or die because my mom is a ride or die. And so it kicked in. So any type of relationship that I was in, I always felt like, I'm down with you. I'm down for you. Now, don't do something stupid and illegal. Fine, but I'm gonna ride out with you in a very specific way. And so I was raised that way. And I think the culture at the time really glorified that, right?
Yeah.
Look at back in the day, so I think it was a little bit different. I think LL Cool J kind of like brought that out in some ways. And so you start to see yourself in these images, in these music videos and things like that. And you're like, yeah, I'm like that too. That's very much me. And so what you don't realize is that you take those things into relationships, and you don't always see that those things are not good and they're not of God, right? And so I went through this whole season of kind of like trying to discover who I was, but I really didn't get to that point until the relationship ended. I didn't get to that until one day. My then husband came home, and I felt ambushed. He came home, he went to a Warriors game and came back and said, I think 7 words that really changed my life is like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, do what? And he said, this relationship. And I was devastated because, I mean, really in my heart, if I'm being honest, I worshiped him. I worshiped the way that he communicated, the way that he carried himself, everything about him. And so when you make that type of investment, right, and it wasn't perfect, but I think I had the mentality of like, hey, I want to get out what I put in. So I put in a lot of work. I put in a lot of tears. You sow it. You sow the tears. You sow the work. And all these different things, only for someone to just say they don't want to do it anymore. They just want to leave. And we didn't have the type of relationship where we were laying hands on each other, where we were arguing, because he had this really calm demeanor about that really helped me to also be calm. And so I wrote about this in my book, and the title of my book is called From Pain to Purpose and How I Came to Know God. Really, that's what it's about. The season of divorce and infidelity and betrayal and debt. And so I really describe, you watch these shows when people break up, and it always seems like it's really explosive. It wasn't like that. And so when they want to leave, you see on TV, somebody's packing up and they're leaving. But what happens when they say they want to leave and you get right in the same bed with that person and you just guys turn back to back and you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do next? And you're just crying.
Yeah. So once he said that, what was your response to him? Was it like a why explanation, or was it like dead silence? So like, hey, we're just gonna go back to doing, like you said, we're going to go to bed and kind of turn back to back. Like, what were you thinking at that particular point for somebody just out of the blue?
You really think like, why? What happened? What is it? What can I do differently? Tell me. I will fix it. I will correct it. Because that was a part of my people pleasing spirit. I wanted to please him. So I was like, if I'm doing something, just tell me, I'll stop it. And it just seemed like, not seemed like, child, it was desperate. It's like a desperate cry. Because you don't want it to end. And we had 2 kids. My kids at the time were 3 and 5. And
wow.
In the Bay Area, very similar to kind of like living in New York, incredibly expensive. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how can I live this life without him? I built this life with him. And so it was, just kind of odd. It was in the twilight zone. And in my book, I described it as, think about where you worked somewhere for a long time and you put your heart and soul into it. You may not be the top performer, but you try incredibly hard. And one day they're just like, you know what, your services are no longer needed. The company's going to go in a different direction. That's exactly what it felt like.
Wow.
And he had already detached himself. So oftentimes, they talk about that 7-year itch. That means that it takes them that long to get to the point to even say they want to leave. So it can be on either side. And so what happens is you check out in your mind and you check out in your heart. And by the time you say the words, it comes across a little cold, especially when you weren't expecting it. I just wasn't really expecting that. And so I wanted to do something different.
Can I ask you this though? Before that, did you feel like you were happy in the marriage, or you just felt like you were kind of coasting in what a relationship, you know what I mean? Like just going through the motions of relationship, or was it so shocking because it's like, hey, I'm happy and I feel like we're in a good place. Like, where's this coming from? You know what I mean?
Question to ask. I don't know. So some of your listeners may have gone through this, but have you ever gone through where you feel like you have these things? So you have this marriage that seemingly looks good on the outside. You have the kids in the school you want to have them in. You have the cars, you have some money, and you're just like unhappy on the inside.
Been there.
Yeah, I felt that way, but I thought that was normal. I thought like relationships are not perfect. You're not always going to have this high, like you feel like you're high, the sensation of being high, like it's, like it's fun all the time. So I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought that, why wasn't I satisfied? And so I remember one day, my then husband, we were in the car and he said he felt like I was a passenger in the relationship. And I was like, well, what do you mean I'm a passenger? He says, well, why do I always have to come up with where we go and what we do? And I wanted to say, and I just didn't speak my mind. I wanted to say, because you want to do what you want to do. And if I say, let's go here, you're going to counter it with something else. And we end up doing exactly what it is you say you want to do. And so in a big way, I was a passenger in my marriage and I just didn't know it. And I had feelings of unhappiness, but there was no way I was going to give up on that because I felt like the happiness would ultimately come again. Like you have these moments of, of elation, of joy, of having, like you have these different emotions of sadness. But I thought that was just what relationships look like.
Gotcha. I gotcha. I think a lot of people struggle in that area. As you were talking, I was reminded, I've been in a relationship similar to that where I think the optics look good. And And it wasn't until I lost my dad, and that kind of, it really, really opened up. I don't want to say it made me see who was there for me, so to speak, but it made me look at relationships really different. And it made me say, hey, like, what is your purpose in my life? You know what I mean? And it was a hard decision to make because, of course, I'm a single mom as well, and I have children involved. And I was worried. I think I was always more worried in regards to that, what that looked like. My parents were together 40 something years before my dad left here. You know what I mean? And I had a vision of what success looked like in relationships, as most people I think do, and how I had coined that. Of course, I didn't want to be with anybody else, outside of, and this is probably not going to sound strange in 2022, but old school values of like, hey, you don't have kids with someone and then be with someone else. I mentally couldn't get past that, right? It kept me in a relationship for a really long time that really didn't serve me. And no pun intended to him. It really didn't serve who I was. It didn't serve my purpose. It didn't serve where I was going. Mm-hmm. And I think at a time I cared, and not that I shouldn't care what, how my children are impacted, but I definitely was more focused on their happiness than mine. Like I felt like I would endure or have this almost like sacrificial love in that space and place. And eventually I would be okay, because once they got older, it would just kind of work out. I'm not really sure where I was then, thinking back. But yeah. I love that. I love that. I love that you had the courage after he came to you and kind of said that to look inward, because it sounds like even when you describe your book, the pain to purpose, that whole situation and all of those events kind of led you back to you. And a lot of times I feel like we're looking for happiness in other and through other people. And we don't really look at ourselves and say, hey, is that really going to make me happy?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you're saying. And I would put a caveat to what you said, which is a couple of things. So first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. But just kind of like a caveat around this whole idea of relationship is that oftentimes we grab the way that relationships should look from culture, or based off of what we see in, our parents' relationship, or we try to do the complete opposite of what that looks like. And what I love about Pastor Michael Todd and Transformation Church and his whole book of relationship goals is really talking about doing relationships God's way. And the only way that I was able to find myself was when I found myself through Christ, right? Because it's different because culture and your life experiences will shape and define often who you are. But when you take all of that to God, God can strip that down and say, no, this is who you are. You are my child. You are my son, or you are my daughter. And this is what I've said about you. So I've gotten to the point in my life where if it's not said in the word of God, then I don't believe what comes out of your mouth. So you can't call me something that God has not already called me. If you're not calling me blessed and the apple of your eye, right? I don't have to accept whatever you have to say. But I was so conditioned to accept this version of myself that I really thought was true. And it was really shaped from culture and experiences. And I think my whole world just changed when I looked at myself through the lens of Christ. And I know that sounds incredibly religious for perhaps some people, and it almost sounds unbelievable. But I think when you have literally hit rock bottom in your life, and when you feel like your confidence is gone, when you feel like you've been a failure in every area of your life, you start reflecting on some things. And you're who am I? And then you feel like, well, do I have to reinvent myself? And I see a lot of people doing that. And I think they're kind of heading in the wrong direction with that. But I had a friend who reintroduced me to Christ. So I grew up in the church. Listen, I went to church on Sunday, like I said, Sunday school, vacation Bible study, all that stuff. And I still didn't know God. And I was afraid.
Say that again for the audience.
You can go to church and not have a relationship with Christ, and I did not have that. And so, and I didn't know how to pray. So when I had hit this season of desperation and brokenness in my life, and it was like, who do I go and where do I turn to? So my best friend had this beautiful, and still has this beautiful relationship with God, and she prayed me through. And so it was the first time that someone had ever prayed for me out loud. Mm-hmm. That was the first audible prayer that I heard for me. I've heard prayers in church. I was like, well, they don't have anything to do with it. And so when she started praying for me, that was the only time, honestly, that I felt peace in my spirit, because I felt tormented. I felt like when I went to sleep, I felt like I was waking up in the middle of the night crying. I felt like my heart would be racing. I was just so upset. But when she prayed for me, I didn't feel tormented in my mind. I started thinking like, well, did he leave me because of this? Did he leave me because of that? Now, ultimately, I found out that he was in a relationship with somebody at his office. Right. And that was devastating for me. But it was one of those things where you start making up these stories, you start creating these stories in your mind. And if you start creating anything in your mind, whatever you believe becomes reality. It's just true.
That's true. That's true.
But when she prayed for me, it stripped some of that stuff off of me, and I would always feel better. And I was like, what is this that she's doing that helps me to feel this way? And I just remembered one day she was praying for me. And I'm gonna be real honest, when you're going through torture and hell like that, I picked up the phone, and we all have somebody. I pray that we all have somebody we can turn to. I would pick up the phone and she would say hello, and I would just say, hit it. And she knew I meant hit those prayers, because I knew it right. Now slap me over the head with a prayer. And because I needed to feel like, I didn't want to feel that feeling of anxiety. I didn't want to feel depressed anymore. I didn't want to, feel broken anymore. I didn't want my kids to look at a mother who was constantly crying. And I felt like I had to hide that from my kids. And, it was times where we were living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. And I didn't have money to put in my gas tank. I was calling all these credit card people just to see how much could I put $20 on this and $20 on this. And at the time, this is when gas in the Bay Area had gone up to $5 a gallon.
Ooh.
I was like, I can't make it to work. So I would tell my kids, okay, we're going to have a stay-at-home day. And they were like, yay. They didn't know that I just didn't have money to put in my tank. Meanwhile, he was in Aspen. He was in London. He was just traveling, spending money because he was a lawyer. And so he, made a whole bunch more money because I decided to pursue education instead of, right? And it was just these moments where I just started feeling like my life sucked, right? Again, you tell yourself that story long enough, you will believe it. It's a self-prophecy. But when she prayed for me, I didn't feel like that. And one day she told me, you're really going to have to pray for yourself. I was, wait a minute. I don't know how to do that. I didn't know how to pray for myself, because growing up in the church, you hear the prayers, but they don't just resonate with you. So like, what is that supposed to sound like? How long am I supposed to pray? I didn't know any of that. And so I was honest, and I said, God, God, I don't. And why would he want to hear from me? Because I hadn't prayed in 20 years. Because, I was caught up in my life. I was caught up in this man. And I was like, God, who, what? And so she told me, and it changed me, because she said, because he created you and he loves you. And when you are in a season and you don't feel loved, to know that the universe loves you, that changes. And so that was the first night that I had prayed in 20 years. And I'm going to tell you what I said. I'm going to help somebody.
Help us.
It wasn't eloquent like my best friend. She would, oh my God, it was like she was praying down and raining fire down from heaven. But when I prayed, I was like, God, help me. And it was the best night's rest that I had had in weeks, because God heard me and he answered it, and he came and comforted me. And I was so excited. And I said, oh my God, he's real. Like, that was the first time that I felt the presence of God and that he was real. And so then she was like, okay, I'm happy. She was like, now it's time for you to read your Bible. I said, wait a minute. And I was just, I'm keeping it real for your listeners. I said, I'm sorry. What is me reading about people who died over 2,000 years ago going to help me in the hell that I'm in right now? But I think I was so desperate. And because I felt that peace, I was like, let me do it. Because I had a Bible. You grow up in church, you're going to have a Bible.
Yeah.
When I just started reading, and I wasn't sure where to read. First of all, people say Psalms, Proverbs, the gospel. And I heard this voice, and I didn't know at the time it was the Holy Spirit. He said, where do you start anytime you pick up a book? In the beginning. So that's
in the beginning.
And I devoured it. And when I tell you, it put me on this path of rediscovering who I was through him. Boy, that changed everything for me. Relationship goals. I'm like, I've met men who, where do you go to church? This was back in the day when the 49ers still were at Candlestick. He was like Candlestick Park, right? That's where you worship. Okay. Or, Jesus is in Yosemite. Just the crazy stuff that people would say. I'm like, I'm not trying to be with someone who doesn't know God for himself.
Can I ask you if your ex-husband, did he know God, or was he a Christian? Was that not of importance at that particular time?
Well, we don't even have enough time to even talk about that. My mom told me, because he was not a believer. So this is the buzzword, spiritual. Okay. I'm not dating nobody else who says spiritual. Right? You ain't speaking Jesus, because we're unequally yoked. And my mom would tell me that I was unequally yoked with him, but I really didn't understand what she meant. I knew she meant I'm a Christian, he's not. But in my mind, back then, I was like, well, it ain't like he's worshiping the devil, so we good. That's really what I thought. And again, just this warped sense of how you enter into relationships with people. What is it that you really value? Right?
Yeah. I don't think we have those conversations, though. I think that's where we get it wrong, is that, and I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine. I think entering into relationships, we don't have real conversations and open conversations, and people aren't necessarily honest. We have a vision of what relationships look like, or your relationship goal looks like, which is, I always think relationship goals. I love Pastor Todd's book, because I think that culture relationship goals, it's how can you define only what people are allowing you to see? You don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You're asking for that, and you have no idea if that, the couple is crying or arguing or doing anything behind the scenes. You don't get to see that. You only get to see what they allow you to see. And that's a dangerous place, like you even spoke to, where someone gets to see, I'm sure, probably at that point in your marriage, it probably outward looking in, it probably looked great. People were calling you relationship goals.
Listen, people were shocked. People were shocked when they found out that my marriage had ended, because they thought that it was so great on the outside. And I didn't tell anyone outside of my close friends. And I later told my parents, because I felt like a failure, right? My parents have been married now for 50 years. And they've gone through a lot of hell to remain together. And so I'm like, here I am. I got in my third year of law school, and I decided to make a switch into education. So I felt like, okay, maybe I failed in that, but I got a prize, which was this relationship. Okay, so now that's ended. So I'm failing at that. Okay. And when he left the relationship, and I said this on Pastor Darius's live, which is, I got stuck with more than $1.1 million of debt. When I tell you everything was in my name.
What?
Listen, don't do what I did now. Everything was in my name, because although he made more money, I think at the time he was making almost $300,000. He made more money, but his credit was crap. And so, the house was in my name. The credit card debt was in my name. And when somebody is done with you, they don't care that all that stuff is in your name. I had so much stuff in my name. And again, the Bay Area was really expensive. You couldn't get a house for under, at the time, $500,000, unless you live in the hood. And so we had this really expensive house. Our kids were in private school. And it was like, okay, I can't go to Aspen. I can't just get on and go to London and go to Paris. I couldn't do any of that. And so in some ways, seemingly, he was living his best life, and I'm stuck with all this. And let me add this. So not only was I stuck with all of that debt, I didn't know, because this is when you release your power and you just give yourself over, that we had IRS debt. I didn't know that, because I gave, all my, here's W-2s, you take it, like, sit down with the tax person. Jesus, we had over $100,000 in unpaid taxes.
Oh
And
my God.
I was working for the state of California, and it was easier for them to find me because he was working at private companies. And so they started attacking my wages. And I had to file, like, that was a whole year of trying to convince the IRS to please don't come after me. I didn't know that, because when I was single, if I owed anything, it was $200, and I was really relying on Jesus. Not in addition to that, so the IRS was pursuing me. That house that we had was upside down. Had to do a short sale on that house. All this credit card debt, and then I got sued by a construction company for $30,000 for work that was done on our house that my ex-husband decided he wasn't going to pay. And so, because the house was in my name.
Oh, child, we gonna have to take a break from all this, Lord. You got me over here like, woo.
Listen, when God steps into your life and he reframes and transforms how you think about your situation, I'm telling you, all of that stuff. God, when I tell you he has swooped in, and a lot of the things that I was going through then, I'm not going through now. All that did is gone, right?
Thank God.
But then just, okay, so imagine this. The man you thought was the love of your life and you were going to spend the rest of your life with decides to leave. When he decides to leave, never ask, because I decided, well, let me just move out, because we can't afford to stay in this house anyway. So I'm just going to try to sell it later. We had to move out. We moved into an apartment. He never asked where we were moving to. When I say he didn't care, he didn't care. Those are your kids. You don't know where your kids are going? Listen. So just imagine going through that and having to, kind of like relocate yourself, not really having the resources to do so. Then the IRS is, now you got to tell people at work, like, okay, in human resources, like, wait a minute, that's not right. This should be happening. And then I get sued personally. Like, when I tell you I was going through hell and I could barely pay those credit cards, that, because I mean, that champagne taste.
Yeah.
The beauty of all of this is, one, I can help other people who have gone through what I've been through. And I don't care if it's a marriage or whatever, because sometimes when you leave something, you don't leave it whole.
Yeah.
I tell you that God really kind of, my heart was shattered and I felt like into a million pieces. And he literally put every piece of it back together and made it stronger and fortified it. And I think that's why I'm able to really help a lot of people in the consulting and in the coaching space that I do, because I'm like, when you start traveling down the path of God's way, it doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that you're not doing it by yourself.
Yeah.
And to be the father that he never could be to the kids, and a husband that I needed at the time. Right. I mean, covers you completely and gives you direction. And so when he said to let it go, I let it go. When he told me not to talk about my ex-husband ever to my kids in a negative way, I didn't do it, even though I wanted to. And so it's this maturity that starts to happen if you let it. It's a choice that you have to make, and not everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to talk about my purpose, but you can't have purpose outside of God. And that's what people are trying to do. They're like, well, I think God is doing this and I think God is doing this. Are you being obedient to God? Like, right. So there's all these things that go along with it. So when people come and talk to me about, I need clarity around my purpose, I'm starting to ask a lot of questions just to see really where you are and what you're thinking.
You are.
Often thinks that that purpose is synonymous with their career. That's what they think.
I think most people do initially. I think we aren't taught purpose. I think now, again, now purpose has become more focused. But I know for me, purpose was attached to what I did for a living. It wasn't, you know what I mean? And it can be, but like finding, you said something earlier about like looking and being like, who am I? I think a lot of people don't take the time. They may think that in their head, but that validation is usually attached to their career goals, their relationship goals, and just like, oh, I was able to obtain this guy who's, as they say now, who has the bag, you know what I mean, type thing. But I don't think a lot of people understand purpose or
no,
are walking in purpose. Yeah.
it's funny because so I want to make sure that people get access to my purpose walk quiz. So if you could just put that in the show notes. So if they feel like,
oh yeah, definitely.
yeah, so that's something that they can kind of take to kind of like figure out where they are. But I love something that Pastor Darius said to us in the den, which is you turn into what you tune into. Ooh.
That's a good one. Yep.
Tuning into something all the time, at some point you're going to turn into it. So the lyrics that you're listening to, that's how you're going to walk some things out in relationships. So if you think you're supposed to be this bad type of person, whatever that might look like for you, if you think that it's always, I'm about to clap back on you right now, then that's what you're going to do in relationships, right? You're not going to really always understand what it means about sacrificial love and what it means to be gentle and kind-hearted, right? Because you're tuning into stuff and you're turning into that, and that's manifested in these relationships that you have. And I will be very honest, for 3 years after my ex-husband left, when I got on, I was listening to Joel Osteen. Listen, now I don't care what people say about Joel. If you're feeling bad about yourself, that man will encourage you in the word. Like I was encouraged. I always felt better about myself. And Joyce Myers. But for 3 years, my kids were like, can we listen to something else on the radio? No, we listen to Joyce. We listen to Joyce all day, every day, because Joyce is feeding me right now and strengthening me in a way that I've never felt as strong before. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So going through everything that you, and I literally, I applaud you, because I think so many people can probably relate at one point or, you know, of your story or not. But I think, like, I'm just so curious of how you feel about love now and finding love and seeking love when you've been, you know what I mean, been through that. Sometimes we take that into next relationships. And I know you talked a lot about how God has healed you and set you in your purpose, and you're doing so much as coaching. But how do you feel about love now? Because I think people end up bitter. They end up, you know what I mean, so triggered by certain things, and people tend to put up walls, you know, where there should be gates in those areas. So like, how do you approach the love? Because I know I'm hoping that you still want love, you know what I mean, and you're still open to love and marriage and all that good stuff, because you deserve it.
I'm open to it, but I'm not open to the foolishness. And
okay.
So, I absolutely believe in love, and I think you can have loving relationships. And anybody who I interact with, I try to interact from a place of love, whether I know you or not. Because I want you to see the God in me, right? That might be your only opportunity. So that's a form of love. I think you're talking about romantic love. How do I not be bitter from being romantic?
Yeah.
I love the idea of being married, right? It's something that God created. I'm absolutely not bitter about it. I do not dislike men. Hey. Yeah. Okay. But I'm very deliberate in what I do now, right? Whereas before it was like, you see what you like what you like. Hey, right. You want to get to know this person. But when I start seeing signs that it's not going to work for me, I try to be very honest and direct. But I try to do it in a way that still reflects the love of Christ. And I can say to somebody, you know what, this is not working for me. This is not what I want for myself. And like, I wish you well and things like that. I can even accept the rejection, because I'm like, hey, it's your loss. And the beauty of it for me is that I look at it as that it wasn't meant to be, and I'm okay with that. And so no, I don't power push when it comes to relationships at all, but I'm very deliberate. And so what does that look like? It looks like for me that I don't date a lot unless there's something that I see value. And it got to go beyond your looks, because listen, we're not gonna always look good, right? You know, you gotta look good on the inside. And so I look for that. I look for, like, is my spirit jumping when we speak? Like, are we vibing? Can you walk alongside of me in purpose? Can I walk alongside of you? How can I serve you? How can I help you? Or do you have that same approach and attitude when it comes to me? And so there's men out there who say, like, yeah, I believe in God. But then when you start peeling back the layers, it's just like, it looks the same way, hollow, the way that it looks for me. And I don't want that. I want a lot more. And so I value myself. I don't feel lonely or alone at all. I feel so driven by what I know God has called me to do. And I believe that, in the right season, at the right time, I'll meet the right person. And I'm okay with that. And I wish anybody any type of joy and love and happiness that you can find in your relationship. But I want you to find that in your relationship through Christ first, so that, you will value it in a very different way than the way that we are taught in culture.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not bitter. Yeah, God already stripped a lot of that. So when you get to a place of radical obedience, which is where I was when God told me not to say something, even as badly as I wanted to say it, like, I just didn't say it. And so then you can forgive somebody, because it's not really about, listen, this man has never apologized for leaving me with all that in the way that he's never apologized about, but I don't need the apology to forgive. I can go ahead and be like, okay, does he still do annoying things? I'm sure that I annoy him to some degree, and that's okay too. I can still move forward and not feel bitter, because I feel like God has really delivered me from a lot of stuff that I had. I'm not completely delivered, but for the most part, there's things that I'm not as easily triggered, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. I'm literally applauding you. I think you've come such a long way, and most people haven't made it through stuff like that. And to be in, kind of not only working in your purpose, moving in your purpose with your book, and helping other people, you know what I mean, through their journey. I love that. I love that, and I applaud you for that. I love that you came to, share with us on the show. I hope that the audience, I want you to leave them with some wisdom. I always do kind of like a wisdom, something you can leave them, if you can give them some type of wisdom to take away. But I think you've left us with a mouthful of your experience, and just really, you said something in your last statement that now you're okay with waiting. And I love that, because I think sometimes we're in such a rush to get to whatever we consider relationship goals and into relationships, and we go too fast, and then you end up in something and it's hard to get out of and hard to untangle what you've entangled yourself into. So can you leave us with just if you had some words of wisdom to give the audience today, what would that be?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of something that you just said, kind of like this idea of waiting. I would say during your season of waiting, make sure that you go to God and get the healing that you need. Because the last thing you want to do is take brokenness into the next thing, right? So sometimes we pray for, Lord, send me this person, but you might be an emotional wreck. You might be incredibly hypersensitive, or maybe even overly hypersensitive. Like, those things need to be addressed. You want to take your best version of yourself into the new thing that you've been praying for with God. You want to take your wholeness into a relationship and not brokenness. And I would also say that whatever heartache and pain, any type of annoyance or frustration that you have been through or that you might be in, always serves a greater purpose, right? But we always have to choose, right? God gives us the opportunity to choose life or death. And so you choose words of life. You choose this path of life. And so God is always standing with his hands open and just saying, come, I'm ready to receive you. And so we just have to make that decision to just jump in his direction. And so I encourage anybody to do that. A failed relationship, a failed marriage is not the end of the world. It just makes you stronger. It makes you more wise. It makes you better. And then prayerfully, you've gotten healed emotionally. And so then that whole experience will make you whole when you go into your next season.
I love that. So thank you so much for coming on. Can you tell us just where people can find you? Instagram, your YouTube. I'm gonna put it all in the box so people can can contact you. But I know you also have a podcast, so I wanted to talk you to talk a little bit about that. So if they want to go over and listen, and I'll put all of that in the YouTube link so people can find you.
Yeah, so I show up more frequently on Instagram. So my handle is I am Dr. Vernell. So IAMDR, V as in victory, ERNELL. So on Instagram, I have all kind of links there that you can kind of get in contact with me. I am the host of the Awaken to Purpose podcast, and that podcast is really talking about relationship recovery, right? So the rise and fall of relationships, and then the rise again through Christ. So people who have these incredible stories to share, of how they've been able to overcome the brokenness and the pain. So that's the podcast. I just started a little, my YouTube channel. I still got to get that thing off the ground. I got to hire somebody to help me with that. I still haven't quite figured that out, but I am on YouTube. You can find me under Dr. Vernell. Last name is Deslonde, Deslonde. Would love if you guys, if you don't know what God has called or created you to do, you can always schedule some time with me, and please take the Purpose Walk quiz. It's really great quiz, lots of buzz around it. And then I'm happy to share whatever else is going on once you join my email list.
Yay. So we'll talk to you soon. Maybe you'll come back and bless us with some more gems and jewels. But I thank you for taking the time out. And until next time, you guys, see you next show.